Hello there, everybody. Steve the Amateur Historian, back in old historic Albina, where I just constantly keep finding myself coming back to over and over again. Even though like 2 years ago, I didn't even know this area was here. And for today's sake, we're starting next to one of the oldest buildings on this old historical stretch, which is Davis Block. This building right behind me. The place has got a lot of great history. It was built in 1890. So again, it's one of the oldest buildings on this stretch. The story that I bring, Historic Murders Portland episode I bring you about bones found under the dance hall, based on the address, it would have been located right back here, right behind Davis Block. While Portland was in the throes in 1920 of like a torso killer, they found a human head in one of the rooms upstairs in this building that they thought maybe was the head of that victim, and then they determined that the head had actually been there a lot longer than the victim had been dead, so it was just somebody else's head was found in one of the rooms upstairs. So, very interesting history, but for our sake, this is merely a prominent location, an important location in relation to this fresh episode of Historic Murders of Portland. Alright everyone, so it's very loud over here. There's a train passing me right here, which is, good timing even though there's constantly trains going through here. The area behind me is the massive Albina, I don't know if it's still called it, but it's always been kind of referred to as the Albina rail yard. It was massive in bringing workers from the west side of the river to the east side of the river when it was still developing. A lot of people who worked on the west side of the river where downtown is, who, wanted to or were working railroad jobs, came over to this side. So this very massive area behind me, there's like track after track after track after track, and they go north behind me for a rather long period of time. But for our sake, it's June 14th, 1921. And there is I guess you call him a railroad agent. He was kind of a special railroad agent named John H. Phillips, whose job was to kind of, make sure nothing fishy was going on in the rail yards here. Trains were a primary source, especially inland when you're, can't use boats and whatnot, ships and barges. These are the primary ways that people transported goods. So you had lots of trains coming through here with lots of goods, which was going to be a very enticing location for criminals who want to steal stuff and sell it off on their own to be in. And on the night of June 14th, John Phillips was searching these yards. They say that he was a little bit closer to Mock's Crest, which the hills kind of over here, can't see them too well. As they kind of start to reach out, just past there, kind of where this big Union Pacific thing is, just past there, that's kind of where Mock's Crest is. So I don't know if it was super far down there, but it was a little ways further north of where I am now. But obviously I can't get into that area, this area here. I'm pretty sure this is all restricted. And John H. Phillips was, again, kind of in that area, so a little further north of here in the rail yards. And he, I think along with other railroad agents, were searching the area pretty intensely because there had been a rash of boxcars that were transporting cigarettes that were getting ripped off. The boxes were just disappearing by the bushel. So that was primarily what John H. Phillips was investigating, and authorities want to say that while he was investigating, numerous boxcars in the area, he stumbled onto some criminals, some thieves who were in the act of robbing one of the boxcars. And with that theory, they apparently pulled a gun and shot down John Phillips when he showed up, to escape. So John Phillips was gunned down, again, somewhere in these Albina rail yards, a little bit further north of where I am right now. He was gunned down in that vicinity and died almost immediately. So this is a big deal. This is an agent of sorts who's gunned down here, and presumably by two perpetrators, because there was a man named Harry Patterson who worked in this area, and he said that he saw two men. I don't know if he actually saw the shooting specifically, but he said that he saw two men in the area, and he passed them in close proximity, and he identified them as a James Casey and a John Burns. So since he was able to identify them by name, I'm wondering if he actually knew these men. And, he said that right before the shooting happened, that he passed, again, in close proximity to these men, so it wasn't like he was seeing them from very far away and was like, I think that's James and John. I'm just going to say it is. So it seemed like his identification of these two men was pretty definitive. And, quickly the dragnet goes out. They start searching all over this area of Old Town Albina. They start searching, rooming house after rooming house after rooming house, hoping to find where these guys are. And come June 17th, so it's 3 days after the shooting of special agent Phillips, again, somewhere down here, that they actually tracked. They determined that this John Burns was a guy who actually owned, or was maintaining, I don't know if he owned it, but he was maintaining a rooming house literally just up the road right here. This is the intersection behind me. This is Interstate Avenue right next to me. And at this intersection behind me is Russell Avenue. Russell starts going off this way. And this is kind of the main historical hub of Old Town Albina. This is, pretty much what primarily remains of a town that was established in like the early 1870s. And they determined that John Burns, with his wife, was running a rooming house right up Russell Avenue here. So only blocks from where the shooting occurred. And so theoretically, if these men were responsible, they could have committed their act, raced across the rail yards towards this intersection, raced up Russell here, and literally just dead ahead, there's a brick building right over here, and that is Davis Block. That is where the Burns rooming house was located. It was right here, so only a couple of blocks from where the Albina rail yards are located. And this particular stretch, beautiful and historic though it is just this haven of historic murder cases. The Barbara Holtzman case I discussed, this horribly tragic murder of a 5-year-old child, happened in a rooming house that was located right here. There's the Dewdrop Inn murders that happened about 2 blocks north of here. And just a lot of crime in this area. So when the dragnet went, I don't even know if that was necessarily a term back then, but when the dragnet went out for these two men, they were actually focusing their search on a couple of locations kind of east, back this way, and a little bit north. And then they ultimately discovered that John Burns and his wife were running the rooming house. I don't know if they were running the businesses below, but they were at least running, these rooming houses, the apartment spaces upstairs. It was done very much under the guise of running a legitimate housing place together, but it was known that John Burns was a pretty crooked guy, and he used this rooming house to stash a lot of his cronies. And if he had a friend who was in a little bit of trouble, he'd let them lay low here. And James Casey, the guy that was supposedly seen with him, just happened to be staying here when Agent Phillips was shot. And so And both Casey and Burns were, long-term criminal buddies. They were actually wanted, I think, on federal charges for an illegal booze operation way over in Idaho. So these guys had a crooked background, and when authorities determined that John Burns was tied to this building, they stormed the building. They found Burns pretty quickly. Burns probably didn't think he had a reason to hide, because it's like he would have every reason to be in this place. So they stumbled onto him pretty quick and apprehended him, and he seemed to put up little resistance. And when they said, "Hey, where's Casey? Where's James Casey?" he was, evasive, tried his best to delay them and not help them. And so they started searching room after room after room. Didn't have any luck at first, but ultimately, while they were searching a room that was the room that Dan Casey was presumed to ultimately have been staying in, they found a box of dynamite. They found little items to create explosives with, some very suspicious kind of paraphernalia in his room, which would have been up on the second floor of this building, somewhere here, maybe on the other side, maybe on the front. And right when they started trying to move the bed, they noticed a lot of resistance. The bed in the room wasn't moving, and they noticed a hand reaching out from under the bed, trying to keep it from moving. They reached down, pulled a guy out, and here they have James Casey. He was just hiding under his bed, I guess doing the best he could. So by June 17th, they'd apprehended both men from the Davis block here behind me. And of course, neither men were going to admit outright their involvement in a crime like this. These guys are career criminals, they know the game. So upon their apprehension, police have a little bit of a case against Burns and Casey. They're lifelong criminals. There's one eyewitness that says they were there and did it. So they have something going, but there's still a bit of a case to build in terms of why would these guys be there? Was this part of their game? Was it really in relation to what was going on with Agent Phillips and how he was searching for primarily cigarette thieves? Well, right after the apprehension of these two men, who again, Davis block is where they were hiding out at. Well, if we turn just a little bit and look across the street here, there's nothing here now, but there's a fenced off place that looks like it's not really being used for anything. But in this space right behind me, so we're not even a block down from Davis block, there was a store pretty much right here. It may have been right here, it may have been right here, I don't know, but right behind this fence. And it was a store run by a guy named C.B. Testerman was his name. And he came under fire shortly after this shooting happened, because again, the authorities are searching for cigarette thieves, essentially. And so they're checking out all the local stores, all the local places where stolen goods might potentially end up. And they did discover a little bit of a stock here of stolen cigarettes. And Testerman said that he had bought, a little bit from two guys. Maybe it was Burns and Casey, I don't know. But as the search continued and went on and on, they discovered a massive stock of stolen cigarettes hidden kind of in a safe room. So C.B. Testerman was screwed. They found all this stolen paraphernalia, stolen directly from the Albina yards here, and it was deemed that there was a direct correlation that Burns and Casey were involved, at least in some degree, with this massive, scheme of stealing cigarettes from boxcars over in the rail yards over here, and then, dispersing them to various little markets and whatnot, Testerman's place being one of them. And so it was deemed that there was a tie-in between what was going on here at Testerman's store and Burns and Casey, who again are staying at Davis block, literally right here. So it appeared at this point to be a fairly open and shut case. These guys are already wanted on other charges, However, while Casey pretty much was just here because he was a crime buddy with Burns. He didn't really have anyone here to vouch for him, except Burns. Well, I don't even know if Burns really did that. However, Burns had a wife and he had a family. He had a wife and kids. And, they say that the wife showed up at, Burns' arraignment. She made sure to have the kids with them to get that sympathy. And she said, whether it's true or not, that when the shooting occurred, which was around 10 p.m. the night of the 14th, she said that her husband was here at Davis Block with her all through that time. The story was a little bit shaky because she claimed that they went to bed, or at least one of them went to bed like a little bit before 10. But then there's people, I guess this doesn't really further his guilt, because one of the things that really helped Burns that didn't help Casey was that Burns actually had, he has a wife who's going to claim he has an alibi, which of course just about any person would do for their partner, to keep them out of harm's way or whatnot. But there was also I think he was a store proprietor, and they say he was across the street. So I'm wondering if they were someone who was working out of this building. I think this is called Torgler Block, across the street. So maybe it was somebody who worked out of there, but they were right across the street from Davis Block here. And this guy, who I think knew them personally, said that he saw them when the shooting occurred sitting on the front steps. So literally, he saw Burns and his wife sitting right here by the entry to Davis Block. And here's some of that historical info. John Burns is sitting right here with his wife, according to a witness from across the street. And this was critical to the case. The implication is always that Casey and Burns were acting together. But Burns has his wife and a presumably unmanipulated witness saying he's there at Davis Block when the shooting happened. Now, granted, the shooting only happened a few blocks away, but, so give or take, did the shooting really happen at like 10:15 and he was here at 10 but not 10:05 because he's going this way to meet up with his buddy Casey to start stealing some cigarettes? Maybe. But there's reasonable doubt in there. And there's reasonable doubt that, you'd think if these guys are brought in together, it's not they scheme together, you'd think that they would either both go down together or both be set free. And, one of the big things about this case was they found a gun in Casey's room. And the gun matched the bullets that were used in the shooting of John Phillips. So that's, the gun matched the bullets. So that's a pretty significant detail in this case. That's not something you can wipe under the rug. However, that was the original story when the trial actually took place. The defense argued, and apparently very effectively, at least in Burns' case, that these bullet shells that were found had actually been fired at some time after Casey and Burns were already arrested, which is vindication for both of them. I don't know exactly how they determined when exactly these bullets were fired, but that was helpful towards both of these guys, especially Burns. He had these little extra things that in some ways Casey had, but in a lot of other ways Casey didn't have to help him. So John Burns ended up actually being tried multiple times because they couldn't. It was one of those things where there was just enough reasonable doubt to people that they just couldn't figure out if he was really guilty or not. And so I think he was tried at like 3 different times for the case. Casey was tried on first-degree murder, found guilty immediately in his first trial of first-degree murder. But in the case of John Burns, it kept just dragging out and dragging out and dragging out. And, by later 1922, it's been, a year or more since Officer Phillips has been shot. They finally they let John Burns off. He was acquitted in the end. You know, and it doesn't seem like he was tried again after that. You know, they may have just realized, like, we're never going to get a guilty verdict on this guy. You know, when he's got multiple witnesses saying he's at home when the crime took place. Now, again, Casey didn't have that same luck. He couldn't say that this is perfect. He couldn't say that he was here at Davis Block. Happens to be through the fence. We're looking at the back side of it. He couldn't prove that he was there. He didn't have any witnesses. So it was easy to convict him. But it's strange because there was still, even when the trials were over, there was still always this presumption that these two guys worked together. They always had worked together. You know, other things that they were wanted for, law enforcement had an interest in with them. It was always the two of them together. But then suddenly, in this one circumstance, they throw one guy in prison for life and they acquit another guy. When I'm kind of the impression, now it could be, Burns could have manipulated his buddy Casey, like, hey, tonight for whatever reason I'm not going to do it, but hey, you go down there and you have a ball. But then again, why does another eyewitness, Harry Patterson, say he saw both of them down there together? You know, that's an impossible, you can't just dismiss that. The fact that we have another eyewitness who says he saw both of them down there. Very strange. Very, very strange indeed. I don't know what to believe. Because, I mean, you have conflicting eyewitnesses saying different things. Did Burns and his wife ask the guy across the street, say, hey, you know, if anybody asks, say we were here at, you know, around the time the shooting happened, wink, wink, and then that guy comes out and says that. Maybe they were right across the street from each other. Maybe they liked each other and he wanted to be helpful to the Burnses. You know, and again, you know, in his wife's original story, she said that around the time of the shooting, they were inside and they were getting ready to go to bed. But then later on, they're sitting out on the front steps, out on their front porch. And of course, if the guy across the street's going to be an eyewitness for you, you got to be out front or near the front so he can legitimately see you. If you're upstairs in your bedroom, he ain't going to see you. So I have a lot of issues with the whole thing. I'm not fully convinced Burns was innocent in those regards. I think either both of them did it together or they weren't responsible, and somehow this Harry Patterson guy, who maybe he had a bone to pick with these guys and he had a reason to throw them under the bus. I don't know. The newspapers didn't delve into that element, or that relationship. So, I don't know in the end. But in the end, I don't think one guy getting busted, one guy getting off, I don't think that was proper, because I think they both did it, or two other guys that looked like him, I guess, might have did it. If I had to, you know, gun to my head scenario, I mean, I guess since I'm talking about murders, I'm like 70% feel like Burns and Casey did this crime. And either he was able to rush home, or he did it immediately after he was home, and he was able to kind of make it look like he was home during it to kind of forge a goofy alibi that either he didn't help Casey on or Casey was too dumb to think of himself. Yeah, I'm like 70% sure these guys did it. And the guy who was probably more responsible, Burns, it seems to me, yeah, I think he got off. That's really where I'm leading in this case. But what do you guys think based on that? I'd definitely be interested to know. I mean, obviously, I gave you whatever information I found. There's probably more to be found on various old newspaper sites and whatnot, but that's what I found in this case of the murder of John H. Phillips, railroad agent, on June 14th, 1921, right after Prohibition kicked in. Illegal booze operations and stealing cigarettes. So anyway, thank you so much for watching this fresh episode. As always, remember to like, share, subscribe, comment if you so choose. Again, I just asked for comments. Hit up my Patreon if you so desire. And, yeah, with all that said, from general vicinity of, you know, the Albina railroad yards are back here a little ways, but from the general vicinity, somewhere between the murder scene and John Burns' rooming house. They may have even escaped if they did it. They may have even escaped through this way. Who knows? But anyway, till next time. This has been Steve the Amateur Historian, and I will see you next time.